If I just say the top level is making this runway will take 100 days, whatever it is. Then you go a level below that and you go, okay, there's 1,000 blocks and we're doing 10 a day. There's one crew. Okay, just something like that. It's like, all right, well, that's about 100 days. If you go the level below that, which is, right, well, how long does one block take? And we're going to measure it for 20 times. What you'll actually find is there's a lot of variance in that. And this is where, actually, I'd say that planning stops and operational excellence comes in.
A planner gets their knowledge and their capability to go impact the project. Now, are they entering the data? Are they the person doing? No, that's where, again, the planner's role, the schedule roles kind of stop and the site team, however the organization sets up, takes over. But knowing that information is a superpower.
A lot of projects break down not when actually the actuals diverge from the baseline. It's when the owner and GC start fighting. Like, that's really when they start to break down, and it's more of a cultural one. And what I'd say is I'd kind of add to this and put levels, and I'd get your view on this.
Grab that Primavera PDF, look down the duration column, check to see if there's original and remaining duration, and see how many multiples of 5 there are. If everything's a multiple of 5, you probably have a problem. Hi, folks. A quick one before we dive into this week's episode. Our book, The Critical Path Career, How to Advance in Construction Planning and Scheduling, is out now, and you can order it on Amazon. We'll include a link below. This is a great way to show support for the Beyond Deadlines podcast, and Greg and I have worked extremely hard taking everything we know in our 30 years of experience, plus everything we've picked up from shooting this podcast, and we've tried to pack it into an information-dense book that you can use right away. In the book, we have specific strategies on how to get a raise, how to get a promotion, and find a new job. We include 26 of the best interview questions that we have come across, in addition to 34 specific impact ideas that you can go use on your projects today. We want to thank everyone who's shown us support so far and enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that planning and schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah Piippo, and I'm the CEO of Movar US, a project management-based consultancy.
And I'm Greg Lawton. I'm the CEO of Nodes and Links, an AI schedule management platform.
Each episode is jam-packed with tactics and strategies that you can use on a day-to-day basis. Today, we are going to dive into productivity. We're going to try and cover some of the tips, tricks, and tactics and understandings that we have that help schedulers improve their schedules by focusing on the resources that are out there building the job. Greg, do you want to kick us off with setting the table on productivity?
Sure. And I'll give a bit of a description for the project managers that listen to this as well. And for the schedulers, feel free to use this kind of language with the project managers. So productivity is really just about the amount of work that gets done in a certain amount of time. The way that we look at scheduling when we're into P6 or project or whatever is there's a number of ways that we can define activities. We can define them by just raw duration. So this is a 5-day activity. We can define them by the amount of work that needs to be done. So this is a 200-hour activity, and then the resources assigned to that will determine its duration. Or we look at it just in terms of the resources assigned. So it's all the same equation. It's just which bit are you flipping around. And then really it's about what level you're looking at it. Are you looking at just overall productivity? So I've got 5,000 people on site, will be done in 12 months. That is a productivity ratio of some kind. Or are you looking at like the details? So how long does it take for you to lay 5 meters of rebar concrete? That kind of thing. So productivity is the amount of work your teams can get done in a certain amount of time.
Gotcha. Now, a lot of people, when you bring up productivity, think of the field. Does this also include other phases as well? Design, engineering, procurement, things like that?
It absolutely does, because projects are fundamentally about getting work done. And this is a very kind of closed definition of work. Like work is a task and a thing that contractually must be done in order to hit a milestone, deliver a project, deliver payment transfers, etc. So you've got office work, which is things like how many design documents have you submitted? How many have gone through quality assurance and been signed off? Even things like financial models, like have you given detailed estimates of cost breakdowns, etc. All of that is office work. And then, yes, you have physical work, which can be digging, drilling, concreting, electric. And then actually at the back of it, at the back end of the project, you have both, where you have commissioning. And commissioning is a large amount of physical work and paperwork because you have to sign off setting up equipment. So if you think about productivity as just focusing on the outside, that's an incorrect thought. It's both of them. Now, a question to you, Micah, because I stumble across this even with all the years doing this. Productivity outside is actually much simpler to get your head around. And I like the question. Productivity inside, how do you deal with it?
It is a great question. Outside, you're counting beans, and then the complexity of beans will determine what you count. So what I mean by that, obviously, buildings aren't built by beans, but, number of piles and number of exterior panels is very different than design packages or at the end of the pieces of equipment commissioned and tagged and ready to be used. And so to me, I think the first thing is to step back and say, are we going to track this? Because if you're not going to track anything, you're fundamentally not going to get productivity out of it. So start with that question. What are we going to track? And so when we're talking about outside, to me, some intramural milestones for critical design packages could be helpful. I think we have a whole other episode that dives into that, so I'm not going to get into it. And on the commissioning side, I think we mentioned it last episode, right? Just getting a nice big board up with all the steps and tags in it. So setting up what you're going to track, figuring that out, determining what's important in that mix and making sure you're able to track it, and then just tracking it. And many of those ones that why you're saying they're harder to track is because they're paper and they don't abide by straight linear waterfall logic. There's lots of this or that can be done. And so if you're tracking it the wrong way, the data could skew you in the wrong direction. Most people show up and they get terrified of it and they just say, we're not going to track any of it. And that I think that's where they fall flat, or you start tracking productivity and you're getting, different sorts of metrics and readings. It's kind of going all over the place. And then they throw the baby out the backwaters. I think when you're looking at outside productivity, you just got to start. You got to pick a couple things you find important and you got to track it.
I think there's an element here as well, because we dived in, we said what productivity is, but a lot of people, when I talk to them about this, I really kind of probe it. I don't think it's very well articulated why it's actually important to track this stuff.
Yeah, let me take a stab at that, and you fill in the blanks. Number one is if you're on the owner side and you're tracking productivity. This actually covers, now that I think of it, both. Number one, to me, productivity, the knee-jerk reaction of it is, are we efficient? Will we finish on time? That's probably what most people think of productivity as. I'm looking at this as like, did we say what we're going to do and the amount of time we're going to do it, and how is that going to impact our end date? The second piece of the whole productivity game to me is that you're going to go out and build very similar things, very similar amount of times. So whether you're building data centers or schools or whatever, you should be able to use that productivity information to then impact your future projects on what productivity levels they should assume. And it blows my mind the amount of owners and contractors that have zero productivity across zero anything that aren't then using that across their projects. And then also probably the last one, and it's kind of similar to the first one, but it's a little bit different, right? One is a little bit of a delay mitigation. The second one, this one's a bit of an acceleration. It's when you do get into sticky situations, how much can you turn the dial of your productivity to impact your project? So if you have a good historical set of data based on, a variety of factors of productivity, you should then be able to know, okay, we can actually go a little bit faster, with the second phase MEP, or we could go a little bit faster on commissioning, or we've never seen these levels before, so we shouldn't assume that. I think that's, to me, why productivity roughly exists.
You nailed it on the head there. The only slight things I'd add to that is what you and I use it for, which is a risk thermometer. Yeah. Which is, if you said, I'm going to lay this much concrete per day and you're half that, and you're saying you're on time, I'm like, how many other estimates are off? And then the other is a transparency one, because a lot of projects break down not when actually the actuals diverge from the baseline, it's when the owner and GC start fighting. Like that's really when they start to break down, and it's more of a cultural one. And what I'd say is I'd kind of add to this and put levels, and I'd get your view on this. You and I haven't chatted about this before, but I'd say that productivity is one of these more subtle subject areas. And I mean more subtle in that you can get away with being a very bad planner or project manager and not considering productivity. So you could just say all tasks are 5 days because that's a week, or all tasks are, and you can just kind of guess how long things will take.
That is actually one of my favorite schedule checks, and it takes anybody in the world about 20 seconds to run. Grab that Primavera PDF, look down the duration column, check to see if there's original and remaining duration, and see how many multiples of 5 there are. If everything's a multiple of 5, you probably have a problem. All right. Anyways, continue.
So level 1 would be, I don't know my productivity rates, so I'm just kind of wildly guessing, or I'm kind of just asking people to wildly guess. And I'm not tracking these things. And to be honest, I'm not learning them. I'm just kind of monitoring by what people on site are telling. Oh yeah, it's on track. Okay, whatever.
But Greg, you're an owner. You signed a contract and you gave all the risk to the GC. Why do you need to know the productivity?
Well, for anyone who's ever been through court or litigation, it sucks, and it's preferable not to go there. So even though you've passed everything across, it's very good to have transparency and be able to have good conversations with people. You and I know the experienced owners. Yes, they pass the risk across, but they are transparent and they look to help out. The what I'd call new owner, like owners that are new to this game, do go, well, I've passed everything across, so there's nothing for me here. Okay, well, good luck spending the next 6 months in lawyer meetings. So level 1 would be that basic. Level 2 would be an individual project. So you are actually tracking it at a reasonable level on an individual project. You know, you're using it to inform your future forecasts, which really is what it's there to do. And you're using it to inform elements of risk. Number 3 would then be a portfolio view where you've got standardized coding. You know, I think back to Josh from Zachary. We did the episode with him where he was saying that because they do almost entirely motorways, they know how much their productivity rates for earthwork, laying, foundation, all of these things, they know what their productivity rates are. And to be honest, I could imagine with something as repetitive as motorway building, you're just not a competitive company unless you know, because the margins are, I'm just guessing, by the way. I'm guessing that because it's a commodity, the margins will be pretty low. So you live or die based on your productivity rates.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, thinking on a little more, I'm pulling on, Micah, you know exactly what I'm talking about, the book that we're going in. Thinking on a little more.
Before we go to the book, I just had one thought before we get, into the book. If people are super interested in the, I guess if you have on one side of the scale, or if you started as track productivity, looking at P6 activities, and then maybe you have some spreadsheets of some quantities all the way to like the most sophisticated way you could go, you're going to end up in tact time planning. Okay. So just that is where like the productivity will lead you, and you're going to journey into lean-based planning. And it is an exceptional way to deliver execution on job sites. And so if you're looking to kind of study up on this and get smart, I mentioned some of the like kind of the higher level methods, but they're all going to lean towards that direction. And it all comes down to creating flow on your project and your job site. As the level of planners and schedulers we are, where we tend to be, high level GC to left side owners, we're not going to be the execution based specialist here, but there are plenty of lean shows and plenty of shows and content creators that dive you into tact time planning, that execution based planning. Highly recommend go checking out some of those resources if you're more interested. Now, what Greg was alluding to is, and we've talked about it a couple times on the show, Greg has written a book, and I helped out a little bit, but mostly delayed it, didn't accelerate it. Greg's written a book on project acceleration, and in it, he lays out a couple of different chapters on productivity and really, really, really dives deep into the science behind productivity. So teeing that one up, Greg walk us through science-based productivity without making us fall asleep. And I haven't had my second coffee today, so you're going to have to push hard.
Well, I'm not gonna walk through everything because this will be a 4-hour episode about how you go
High
into this.
level
But
summary.
I'll give you a high level summary, and I'll just say two things. The one, which is kind of an obvious thing, but it's an important one to bear in mind, which is productivity has a hierarchy. When you were talking there about, let's type GC into owner space, we're talking actually about quite high level. We're talking probably, you're not going below a level 5 generally. That says that you're averaging something. So you're talking about averages and you're talking about variance. You're not talking about Dave and Dave's particular skill with the welding torch. Whereas when you go into tact planning and agile planning and these kinds of things, you are actually talking about Dave's productivity with the welding torch.
Come on, Dave.
Down to exact. Yeah, Dave is great with that welding torch.
Shouldn't ate that burrito at lunch, Dave. You're slowing down on that arc welder.
So there's a level to that. Now, the second thing I'll say, which is actually just a way of structuring how you think about this. So if I want to really understand the productivity of an area, there's actually 4 things, 5 technically. I'll do 4 and then the 5th. 4 things that you need to ask questions about that area. So number 1 is, without any kind of complication, what's the productivity that one unit can provide? So 1 digger, 1 concreting team, Dave, one welder, like whatever 1 unit is, what's generally the productivity they can provide? And then the other factors are how that can change. So for example, there's a volume factor, which is pretty linear. It's like, okay, well, if I have 1 concreting team, what if I have 5? Well, technically it should go up by 5. The next one is a coordination factor, which can be positive and negative, which is, for example, okay, if I have concreting teams do work separately, but for example, if I have a commissioning team and I have my electricians and my systems integrators, if they're working together, do they produce more per hour than if they work separately?
Is that like a component of space as well? So how many people you can fit into a space?
So that's the final one. That's a disruption.
Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead.
No, so this is it's the collaboration multiplier. So if I have multiple people work, so for example, if I have 5 welders, is it actually better? Like, do they actually produce more together than if I had 1 welder 5 times? Maybe because, they're passing equipment to each other, they're helping each other, that kind of thing. So that's a coordination. The disruption factor is exactly what you've seen, which is the more units you pack into somewhere, the more they're going to get in the way of each other. If I said, right, well, we're going to have 7,000 concreting teams, they're just like the trucks are going to slam in the door. It's going to be a massive queue down the highway. There's going to be a massive waiting time at the tool shed. It's just going to deteriorate at some point. So if you think about it like this, where you've got, what can 1 unit do? How many units am I getting? That's a volume multiplier. How do they coordinate with each other? So is the productivity going to increase, decrease, or stay the same? And where's the disruption? So and disruption normally falls off a cliff. It's normally 0 and then it falls off very quickly. The coordination factor varies quite a lot. The reason I said a 5th one is because you can have multiple resource types or multiple resource units working together. So for example, in my commissioning, if I had the systems integrators and the electricians working together, it could actually cause a lot of disruption because of space and because the systems integrators might catch up to the electricians and just be sitting around waiting for the thing to be powered up, as opposed to doing a full day shift of electricians and then doing a full night shift of systems integrators.
You said you're going to give the high level, and based on what you gave us, I feel like that may not have been high level. So anyone who's interested in learning about project acceleration, hold on to your belt pants for when Greg's book drops, because if that is high level, this is going to get very interestingly detailed and is going to be an amazing read. So that's kind of seems to me almost like a calculation of productivity.
That is how you calculate productivity, and it's how I'd approach it. So for example, if I generally don't work on projects that are a level 1 in that kind of framework of maturity, maturity. It's more like 2s or 3s, because I particularly deal with the analytics. So I'm particularly dealing with acceleration, risk, litigation elements around the analysis, these kinds of things, more the really advanced analysis. If I'm wanting to get good productivity rates, let's say that it's just, I remember one example, which was an airport, which is literally like they put those massive slabs on the runway, and they were tracking progress based on the massive slabs on the runway. So it's quite simple. But it's like, okay, well, let's just assume the slab deliveries are infinite. So we've got all of the slabs we need sitting next to the runway in the inventory. Then it's like, okay, I remember looking at this and going, well, how are we laying slabs? How many slab teams can we get in? And then it's okay, well, what's the coordination factor between slab teams? It was actually 0, as in they just come and lay, and but the disruption factor was really high, because if you have one crew, they'll start at one end of the runway. If you have another crew, they'll start at the other end. If you have a third crew, well, then you kind of have to start them a bit along. If you have a fourth crew, a bit. And then it comes to the point where actually the bottleneck is going and picking up the slabs and logistically moving them. And it might sound really intricate, but actually I think a lot of superintendents, they think this way because it's about the real practicalities of how you actually get slabs on the runway. And this probably comes to a point that I'd ask you to comment on, Micah, which is, where does the planner stop and where does the site teams and the superintendents start? And the planner shouldn't venture there. We know that, site teams and superintendents shouldn't really venture into P6 and shouldn't be running Monte Carlo analysis and this kind of thing. Where should a planner stop?
Well, I think there's a difference between where a planner should stop and where a planner should stop scheduling. Because to me, a planner should stop scheduling I'm a bigger fan of like the even chunkier durations now as the further I go. If on the flip side of that, let's say you did have a site team that had that backup data. My favorite thing to do is I'm looking at a schedule, I go talk to a team. Hey, that's a 60-day duration. What's going on behind it? Oh, here's kind of a productivity that is based on that assumption, right? Maybe it's a tag plan like we talked about. Maybe it's a spreadsheet that just shows the quantity going across. And I'm like, great, you go handle those details. And so I think a planner should be investigating those details on a part of them, but they should be, stopping when you kind of get to that. It's a sweet spot of like day to day, even like week to week type coordination efforts, because what ends up happening is you end up fumbling over logic that is going to, in the grand scheme of things, not really matter. So your runway example, maybe it's like 4 blocks across and 100 blocks long or whatever, right? And there's like zone A, zone B, zone C, right? If there's no productivity backup whatsoever and you have nothing else, you're going to have to put all those activities in P6, right? And it's not great. Not going to recommend it. But if you have this productivity backend, you could go with a much longer activity and then have that backup to say, okay, well, great. You switch from A to D today. Cool. It still looks like you're tracking versus your productivity, but I don't have to fix that logic. That would be, my recommendation for staying in that sweet spot. You got to find the pocket and you got to stay in that pocket. But you definitely, I just hear all these, when I read Watch LinkedIn, it's like, I'm confused based what people in the UK think a planner actually does. Because every time I see it, it's like something that they don't do. A planner doesn't get into those type of details. A planner doesn't touch P6. A planner doesn't do this. A planner doesn't do that. A planner just helps with high level coordination, making sure the job stays on track. And I'm like, well, how do you do that if you're not doing any of these other things? Now, maybe I'm just probably spending far too much time on LinkedIn and reading too many comments, but that to me is where a planner gets their knowledge and their capability to go impact the project. Now, are they entering the data? Are they the person doing? No, that's where, again, the planner's role, the schedule roles kind of stop and the site team, however the organization sets up, takes over. But knowing that information is a superpower.
That's the point. So from my experience, number one, the point you made about when they stop scheduling and when they stop knowing, I think I haven't thought about it that way, but that actually encompasses it. Number two, in my experience, this varies a lot between industries. So for example, if you're doing a nuclear outage, you actually plan to the minute. And do that because of regulation. So like that is, right to the minuscule detail.
Because everybody's going to die.
Yeah. But for example, if you're building a highway, then you could just be like Section A concreting, big long bar. and you can get through it. The third thing I'd say is to the maturity point, which is if you actually want to do risk analysis and acceleration analysis and variance analysis and these kinds of things, this is at the heart of it. So if you think about it, if a risk analysis and a variance analysis and acceleration analysis is all about wobbles, so like the wobbling duration, how do you get an understanding of the wobble of a duration? Well, this isn't magic. You just look at what makes up the duration. It's the same as going, this material melts, 1,000 degrees C. How does it do that? Well, you look at the bonds between the atoms. That's physics. So you're like, well, I just look at the energy levels and blah, blah, blah. And it's the same thing here. It's going, I just need just one level below, which to your point, you can go and ask the site team. Now, if I know that they're thinking of using 4 crews and a crew can do 10 blocks a day and that's how it's based, and then I know that that goes on the critical path, then I can go to the site team and go, how quickly could we get a 5th crew here?
Yeah.
And it's just that simple.
And then extrapolating that out, if I went and did another project, how great would it be if I had, that's how many blocks it takes per day. So when you gave me a duration, we can start talking about blocks instead of I'm filling out an RFP and this is the bar that it'll take to fit into the time it takes to deliver the project. And that is, I would say, in my time, I see productivity go to a point and then it usually falls off, because that is another big jump to take productivity from lots of projects, because not all projects are the same, and then be able to apply them to future projects. But you got to take that average methodology. You got to step back a little bit. You got to be okay with those slight little differences. And, maybe this is an apple, maybe this is an orange, but guess what? It's all fruit. If you put it in a smoothie, you can drink it anyways. You got to be able to make that jump if you really want to then impact future projects, because normal productivity tracking is just tracking how late a project is. Taking productivity information and applying it to a new project is actually impacting that project.
I'll just finish on one thing, which I just think is an interesting thought, which is, so productivity isn't consistent. So if I just say the top level is making this runway will take 100 days, whatever it is. Then you go a level below that and you go, okay, there's 1,000 blocks and we're doing 10 a day. There's 1 crew. Okay, just something like that. It's like, all right, well, that's about 100 days. If you go the level below that, which is, right, well, how long does 1 block take? And we're going to measure it for 20 times. What you'll actually find is there's a lot of variance in that. And this is where actually I'd say that planning stops and operational excellence comes in. And the greatest planners I've ever worked with set up proper processes with operational excellence, because that's how they actually create predictability at a systemic level. So, for example, there are people, they're not planners, it's the Ops X team who are on with stopwatches and they're measuring things and they're pulling stuff out of Procore and they're pulling stuff out of whatever system they're using for like job cards and these kinds of things. And they're looking at that level. And the key, it's super obvious how this stuff works. Shit wobbles, so you can't be perfectly accurate with how long things take. People are pretty clever, so they can figure out ways around problems. People get tired. So if you're looking at productivity right at the start of a shift or right at the end of the shift, it's going to be lower generally than in the middle. If productivity at the end of the shift is much higher than productivity in the middle, you're probably going to have an accident, because people are rushing like hell trying to get the thing finished. So it's just simple. It's just simple things like this. Like if I had to do a project analysis or a financial analysis and it was 3 a.m. and I'd been up since 7, it's going to be a pretty bad job. But if I did it at like 9 to 12, it's going to be a pretty good job. So my only point there is that productivity is not equal across all, and you can actually start to see some really interesting things on the project, but it's normally not the planner's responsibility. It's normally something like operations that need to be brought in. And that's one of the ways that a planner can sync with other units of the project to deliver value.
Yeah, I completely agree, and a great one to finish on. Well, folks, before we take off, I want to do something special this show, and I want to shout out some of the people in some of the countries that are listening to our show. It blows me away every time I look at the listening stats and locations, but Greg, strap yourself in, get ready, check this out.
I haven't seen these. I'm quite excited about
Shout out to El Salvador, Puerto Rico, Albania, Uruguay, San Marino, Bangladesh, Lithuania, Trinidad and Tobago, Iraq, Togo. Hey, listen, I'm a dumb American. They don't teach
Yeah, you
geography.
said Trinidad and Tobago.
Trinidad. So just bear with me while I botch these, okay? I didn't practice these. Senegal, Venezuela, Algeria, Uzbekistan, Moldova, Hungary, Iceland, Croatia, Macedonia, Armenia, Ivory Coast, Mozambique, Lebanon, Kazakhstan, Namibia, Serbia, Malta, Thailand, Oman, Colombia, Morocco, Costa Rica, Paraguay, Vietnam, Austria, Japan, Lithuania, Hong Kong, Russia, Bahrain, Guatemala, Chile, Qatar, Latvia, Kenya,
Qatar, sorry.
Qatar, Qatar,
Qatar, the Kingdom of Qatar. Okay. Do
Turkey,
you know what? Do you know
Nigeria.
what? There's a stereotype in Europe which is, give someone from America a map and ask them to point at a country, and then they'll
I can
they'll
name
point
them.
at America.
Let me finish this. Portugal, Kuwait, Egypt, Ukraine. I'm going to have you read the next list, and we'll see how you do. Czech Republic, Argentina, Brazil, Finland, Indonesia, Malaysia, Italy, Israel, Peru, Poland, Norway, Switzerland, South Korea, Greece, Cyprus, Germany, Romania, Belgium, Saudi Arabia, Netherlands, France, New Zealand, South Africa, UAE, see, I didn't even try to pronounce that one, Sweden, Singapore, Philippines, India, Taiwan, Netherlands, Spain, Denmark, Ireland, Canada, Australia, United Kingdom, and United States. There it is.
Oh. Can you do a count on that? How many countries is that?
I don't know. I'd have to actually.
It's probably around, I don't know, 100 countries. Now, there's 220 countries in the world, but most of those are like Monaco, Luxembourg, and like small countries within Africa. There's a lot of tiny ones. So I'm like, that's probably most. I heard the top 10 at least biggest populations in the world there. No, except for China. I didn't hear China.
Yeah, we got to figure out how to get over there. That's an interesting one, why it's not on there. Thank you so much for listening around the globe. We really, really appreciate taking your time out of your day to listen to us. Please, if you could, share this with others as we try and grow this audience and grow our presence around the world. We're just trying to help out here. And if you have recommendations, feedback, or ideas, please do share it. It always helps us. Just come up with new content that is for you, because that's why we're doing this. Greg and I wouldn't talk to each other because we actually secretly hate each other. So
I like you.
Well, this got really awkward. On that note, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Have a great week, y'all.